Thank you. Thanks, George. Hey. Um, so it's true. I am the Flutter engineering lead for material design. I'm based in New York. It's really great to be here. I've got a team that's also based in Munich, so I'm hoping that we'll get to spend a lot more time in London and, the rest. Well, are you still Europe? I don't know. But the rest of this area, rest of this region in the future. All right, so here's what I'm going to go through today. I was supposed to be at Mobile World Congress next week giving a talk, and that was canceled. So I'm trying to mix some of what I was going to talk about then with what I was going to talk about now and give you a little extra tonight. So I'm going to go through some of this stuff from Flutter Interact in case you didn't see it or if you missed something. I'm going to look at Google Fonts for Flutter and the new gallery that we have. I'm going to dive into a few things, some best practices that are in there on adaptive or what you may call responsive layout, accessibility, and internationalization. It's how you get new users for almost no acquisition cost. These two things right there. First, big thank you to George for volunteering to put all this together. It's a lot of work. We really, really appreciate it. We're a fan of you. Thank you, George. And for all of you for being so good for coming to this and to all the other ones that he does. All right, so just some stuff for anybody here that's maybe new to Flutter. Although if you sat through the other one, you're almost an expert by now. That was a really great presentation, by the way. Is Darius still here? He's gone. Great job. There you are. Hey, that was awesome. So there are three different ways that we talk about people building apps in Flutter. One is to start from scratch, a brand new app. You're going to rebuild it from the ground up. Another is you already have an app, but you want to add it to another platform. And then even though, so like maybe you have an iOS app written in UIKit, you might write your Android app in Flutter, knowing that then in the future you could consider getting rid of one of the code bases. You know which one. And then the other is you can use Flutter for just a part of your app, what we call the add to app experience. This is something that we've worked really hard to make better and are also continuing to work on for quality and for performance. It can be a really good way for you to get Flutter into your company's app. You can say, let's try this section, let's try this new feature out in Flutter and see if we like the developer experience. Some stats, exciting stuff. So since launching the full stable 1.0 version last year, we've seen some pretty big growth. So as you can see here, we now have a billion plus users of apps that are written in Flutter. So that's a significant fraction of the earth. There are a million plus developers using Flutter since 1.0. It's the number one growing skill on LinkedIn, which I think is pretty cool. And it's in the top 10 most liked repos on GitHub. In fact, I believe we just crossed over Linux and React Native. It's kind of a big deal. I'm just like it's amazing that people are so happy with something we work on. It's just a wonderful surprise that we're able to reach people. Anyway, so 2 months ago, GitHub published their State of the Octoverse. By the way, I was going to call this Flutter Engineering State of the Union. If I had used that term, would that make any sense here? Yeah? Okay. Nah, I don't know. I don't know. American things are a little, dodgy at the moment. So anyway, it's the largest site for open source stuff. They have like really unique insights into the community and trends and adoption. And we were really, really excited to see in their report that Flutter was the second fastest growing open source project across their site. It's got 3x growth compared to last year. And that the Dart language that powers Flutter is the single fastest growing language that they measure, which means it's ahead of things like Rust, which is doing very well, and TypeScript. So really exciting. But of course, what makes Flutter special is the community. We love our community. I always say it's one of the best, most positive communities that I've interacted with in engineering. I come from iOS, not positive group. So here's an example, a little video I'd like to show of what people are building around the world with Flutter. Let's hope that this plays with sound. No, there's no sound whatsoever. Do I have to do this? Oh, is it just going to come out of my thing?
People don't know how bad it is. In order to tackle that, I created Air Care. And thanks to Flutter, the features are consistent and I can get updates really quickly to all of my users.
Jumbo, with Flutter, I found it very easy to learn.
Now, thanks to Flutter, I'm an Android, iOS, and web developer.
I designed a ticket station app which lets you buy, sell, explore, and even find a ride the event you're going to.
What really solved it for us was the stateful hot reload.
Our latest app, Splashpad, is going to enable anyone to write music.
In the Radio app, users can build custom training plans. Dart was a breeze, documentation was wonderful, so things look polished right out of the gate.
The Kerala Rescue app was created during the floods of Kerala. Since they already had a website, I could directly use the web views in Flutter, and it helped a lot of people.
I am a solo developer working on a fitness app called Totally Strong. I came for the cross-platform ability, but stayed for the wonderful developer experience.
We have developed a number of apps for international and Sri Lankan market, 6 to be exact. The reason why we went with Flutter is because of its amazing community.
The Flutter community is super friendly and you can build complex apps in almost no time.
Thank you, Flutter.
Thanks, Flutter.
Thank you, Flutter.
I love the Flutter.
For now, Dash and I have to get back to work. Should we use a container or something else?
Well, I hope you heard that. It was all very, very nice stuff. So people all around the world are using Flutter, and we're seeing it in some really cool places. There's like a huge contingent of people in Nigeria that are using it. And it's also our biggest market is China and India and Germany, which is just really a good reminder, which is one of the points that you'll know very well because this is such an international region, but that we forget about in America, that we are not necessarily everyone, and that we are not the center of the universe, and that there are other people with other needs out there that we need to reach. Flutter's really excited to do that. So, Flutter Interact. Flutter Interact was our event that we had in December in Brooklyn. I suggested Brooklyn because I live there. I didn't have to go anywhere. And they bought it. This was our event. We're doing an event annually. The one before was called Flutter Live. This is like a one-day I.O. just about Flutter. And so we had 6 talks as well as 2 keynotes. My vice president, Matthias Duarte, the vice president of design, gave the first keynote where he talked about how Flutter is a part of Google's larger front-end strategy. And we talked about this concept that's kind of hot right now, that Flutter is a big part of. We're trying to get people to stop thinking about this question. This is maybe the question of when you're thinking, how do I begin developing? I should really think about, where do I want my app to run? Is it a web thing? Is it an iPhone thing? Is it an Android thing? I got to pick one and then get going. But we want you to be able to focus on what you want to build itself and let that be multi-device and multi-platform. And we're providing a framework and tools that let you create a user experience on any device or form factor without compromise. So we like to say, ask this question instead. What do you want to build? Focus on that, and then it can be distributed in all the different ways that it needs to be. We want you to be able to solve problems for your users. That's kind of the point. So we're trying to solve some of your problems for you. We do some of the hard stuff so you don't have to, so you can get back to features and fun stuff. And we want it to be beautiful for you, well, to allow you to build beautiful UI and not just boilerplate UI, not just standard UI, custom UI, like what you showed us today, which is gorgeous. So the world is full of a lot more devices these days. It's not just phones and computers. There's apps running everywhere. And users want to experience your products on all of them. So we call this ambient computing. This is where the world is going. Apps are becoming more ambient. You're needing to interact with them in different kinds of things, from countertop devices like the Google Home Hub, which is something that Google actually chose to build its UI in Flutter. So most people don't know that, but that's really exciting for us, that they actually were building it in one way and then switched over to Flutter when they realized the productivity gains that they could have. Even though they already had something, they rebuilt it. So, all right. So that's Flutter Interact and kind of the basics of it. But what from the event did we talk about that's about executing good design on Flutter? We've made some big investments in beautiful design execution lately and adaptive experiences, and the world has kind of noticed. This kind of blew us away. Right after Interact, this Fast Company magazine said that Flutter and Dart are among the 14 most important design ideas of the decade, alongside the iPad, the Tesla Model S, and social media and Black Lives Matters. Now, I don't know about all of that, but still, to put us in a list even close to something like that is a huge honor. And the person that chose to put us on that list is John Maeda. John Maeda is a design god. You can look him up afterwards if you don't know who he is, but he is a very big deal in the digital design world. And so for him, who doesn't even come from coding, he comes from design, to recognize the value and potential that Flutter and Dart have was very, very humbling, and a really good sign that the story we're trying to get out about how you can make beautiful apps with Flutter seems to be coming true. And of course, material design, which is the team that I come from, if you don't know, it's the official design system that Google has. If you look at any Google app, it is done in a certain way with certain UX and UI patterns. My team is the one that defines those patterns, how they can be customized, and then we build out platform frameworks. We have iOS, Android, web, the Polymer team, if you know of them, they're under us. And of course, I founded the Flutter team on it a couple of years ago. And we're betting really, really hard on Flutter right now. So we have our own team of Flutter engineers. And what we do is we make sure that the newest designs from our designers get to Flutter. And sometimes that happens even before our guidelines, the material design guidelines, are updated. So we even recently doubled the size of that team, so that's why I come here so much now. I have people in Munich, which is really exciting, and we work really closely with the Flutter team, and we're working on some further enhancements. So Darius mentioned theming in his talk. We've heard a lot of great feedback on how theming needed to be improved, and so I'm happy to tell you that there's a kind of like theming 2.0 sort of project going on right now where we're improving the developer experience, because like right now, theme data has, I think, 75 fields on it in its constructor. That's way too many. And half of them are from what we call Material 1, and now we're on to Material 2, so they're pretty much deprecated. And so we are working on deprecating them now. And you may have noticed that what just landed was our type scale moved from the old 2014 values to the 2018 values. So now we have headline 1 through 6 instead of display 1 through 4. So it's a lot more like what people expect coming from the web. It kind of doesn't require you to have to relearn things anymore. Although we did switch body 1 and body 2, don't ask. We're going to continue to iterate on the theme APIs, and that'll be something that you'll see a lot more of this year. If you have feedback about theming, I'd really love to hear it. You can email it to me if you want. Also, I'll have my email address at the end of this. But what the point of bringing this up is that we're trying to make it clear that this very large design org, as the umbrella design org for all of the apps and products at Google, believes very strongly in being closely aligned with Flutter, not just so that Flutter does a good implementation of material design, but so that we are always on the cutting edge. We see Flutter as the future, and so we're investing in it very heavily. And we're really excited about how it solves a certain problem. So if you imagine these as timelines, right now, once design is ready for handoff, development begins. In most companies, the designers work first and then it's handed off to the developers. But development takes a much longer time than design. Designers move pretty fast. They got to make some like pictures, and then you have to make apps that work and stuff. And people go like, why is it taking so long? They don't understand why these things are at different paces. And over time, it can get like really bad. You can get really out of sync with this sort of thing. Like this, I wish it were always like this nice and clean as to what's going on. Instead, there's usually a lot of arguments going on inside there and fights. And people, again, are blaming the engineers. The designers are frustrated that they can't move as fast as they can move. Our goal with Flutter is to actually make it so that development can be at the same pace as design. So if design is this thing that we recognize right now as super fast, we would like to get development to be that fast. And with some of these new tools that we're starting to look at and create, we're actually able to find times where the timeline can blur, where development and design can work together hand in hand and maybe trade off different parts of their process that are better suited for the other person or are not interesting to the other party. One of the ways in which this happens is something that we announced with Flutter Interact, which is a partnership with Adobe that we have, where Adobe's created a plugin for Adobe XD that exports what you've created into Flutter code. And so this is really, really useful for several different use cases. One of which is for designers to be able to have prototypes of things that actually work and do stuff without having to be clickable images, which is what they're using now. And also for you to have example code that you can take and then use in different ways in your app. Obviously, you can't make an app just out of static images that are then turned into code. You have to hook it up in all these different ways. But this should remove some of the questions of what's the corner radius, what's that color, and what's this font here. That part's already done so that you can get to features, hooking the buttons up to doing stuff instead of just how they look. That's part of the idea and one of the exciting things that this does. There's also a company, Supernova, that we showed does a similar thing. I don't have their logo though, it should be on that screen. Note to self. And my team, we released a plugin that we're particularly proud of, which is Google Fonts for Flutter. Has anyone here ever had a frustrating experience trying to add a font to their Flutter project? Yeah, I saw a hand right there. This came up because I was having a terrible time in an example app that I was doing where I was just like, I must be smart. Why can't I get this to work? You know that feeling? We all have that feeling where it's like, oh, you just type in a path, right? And then it goes, but it doesn't, and you don't know why. And it's because paths are stupid. They're so stupid. They're so hard. It's easy to get them wrong. Does it start with the slash or does it not start with the slash? Should it be in the fonts folder? Does it matter if it's in a fonts folder? Can it be in some other kind of folder? All these things were ambiguous, and we thought, at the very least, we can probably clear up the documentation. But where we got was actually a little bit better than that. And so Google Fonts is a project that's underneath material design. I don't know if you've all heard of it, but it's one of Google's oldest investments in the creative and front-end space. It launched actually in 2010. It's an open source catalog of hundreds of typefaces that all like this. These are all taken from it. And it gives anyone the power of using perfect type. It's very popular on the web. In fact, it's so popular on the web that every 2 seconds we fulfill 1 million font requests. So this is how many we've done since 2010. If I had a nickel, well, that'd be something, right? So in the time that it takes, and I love my VP said this, in the time it takes you to say Google Fonts for Flutter, that's another million fonts that was just served. And so at Flutter Interact, we released the official Google Fonts package for Flutter, which makes it easy to get custom fonts into your app. I've got a little, see, is this the video of it? Yeah, so after importing the package, you get autocomplete suggestions while you're working, and it will download it and add it into your app for you. So, you know, this is a lot like Hot Reload, but with your fonts. Now you can really see a dramatic difference of what's going on. But most importantly, no paths. You don't even have to worry about mistyping something unless you accidentally got the Lobster font instead of Lobster 2, which I think is not so bad. This is a huge time saver. And one of the things that people forget is that pairing the perfect font makes a really big difference in how your design is perceived. We're actually entering a phase of design trends right now where typography is kind of having a bit of a renaissance. It's becoming the focus in a lot of places. Things with like giant serifs and really big curves on top of them are starting to show up. Really, really bold choices in fonts, not just bold fonts. And Google Fonts for Flutter is dynamic and it's cached. So while your app is running, it can download it. You don't have to include the font at the time that you bundle it. So that can make a really big difference when you're trying to reach some other markets. One of the things that's challenging about working with Chinese character sets in addition to Latin character sets is that there are many, many, many more glyphs in Chinese than there are in Latin. So it can end up being a very large font file to support it. And if you look at most Chinese apps, they do not have bold, medium, thin, and italic and stuff like that. And not because they don't exist, but because they don't want to add those huge extra font files to the bundle that's then served to people, because we have a lot of research showing us that the smaller your app is, the more likely people are to download it. That we kind of take for granted that an app could be of all sorts of sizes, and that we're probably very connected people with good cellular or Wi-Fi, but that the majority of the world counts every single megabyte that they have, because they're kind of going like penny by penny through this, and they're not going to waste it if they don't feel that it's worth it. So we make it that you can actually download that Chinese font that you need at runtime. And so yes, while people who then need that font are still paying the same price for size, the people that don't need that font are not paying the price for that, so that everybody gets exactly what they need. So this is just one use case that you could come up with where dynamic loading of fonts at runtime could actually have a better business case for you. And so Google_fonts is the package name. It's available on pub.deb, and you can put it in your pub spec today. I highly recommend it. And I'm going to give you a little preview of some of the things that are coming in 1.0. We're improving the autocomplete experience to be even faster. We're making it so that it's more integrated with theming itself. We own those two things. And we're making it so that you can pre-bundle the fonts. So you can still do the typing thing, but instead of downloading them at runtime, you can download them at build time and ship them along. So you don't have that chance that then somebody opens your app while they're offline and they don't see the font that you wanted, if that's something that bothers you. So this is all part of what Google wants you to know is its suite of first-class front-end offerings. Material design, Google Fonts, Flutter, Firebase, even though it's not front-end. These are all things that we believe are a part of a suite of the best offerings that we can give you for creating your own apps and experiences for your users. But in many ways, this is still just the beginning, and Google is continuing to invest in this space. Because there's even more that we need to get done. One of the things is old screens aren't going away. Like, we're adding in more desktop support right now. Now all the stuff that we're doing works on the web as well, which is really exciting. I mean, the web is still bigger than any app platform of either kind. So, being able to say, I built one app and then shipped it also on iOS, also on the web, is something that I've never been able to do in my life before, not coming from like also Android and web. I just still think it's amazing. And so the example that we have for how to do this that you should steal code from is the Flutter Gallery. Now, you may, if you have been working with Flutter in the past, already know about Flutter_Gallery. This is something that lives inside Flutter's Flutter/Flutter. That is that's how we know which thing we're talking about. That's the way we say it. It's an old, well, I'll show you designs of how it used to look. Anyway, so like I said, we're really focusing on these three core form factors: mobile, web, and desktop, which is like Linux and Windows and Mac OS. And our gallery was designed for, is this something that's going to play? Okay, oh, I got to click through it. Our gallery was designed for Google I/O 2018, when Flutter kind of landed on the scene. And it was a big improvement. Oh, wait, that's the one from 2018, over the one from like 2016, which is on the left, which is not designed by a designer, but only by engineers, which is like doing their best and using the standard things. But as you can see, there's significantly more bolder choices in the one on the right, things that had to do with the brand. It was a great step in the right direction, but we knew that we needed it to work on the web when I saw a Googler give a presentation on the web, and this was what they showed. This is the text field demo that was created for mobile. Stretched out, not responsive. So originally we had just wanted to add support for desktop, but it became clear that a full rebuild would allow us to showcase even more features of Flutter and all the things that we've learned in the years since the original one was done. So we actually worked with an agency here in London named Toaster, which I should have been able to meet them while I was here. I've still never met them in person. They hate me. And we asked them, what should the app look, sorry, they asked us what the app should look like, which is weird because we were also asking them what the app should look like. And they suggested, they're like, should it look like all your Google apps do, build from white with the Google colors on it and these rounded corners. And we're like, well, maybe, but it also includes all this Cupertino stuff, the Apple iOS design language components. So we needed something that wouldn't make them seem terribly out of place and also allow us to really showcase them on their own as well. And And material has its own section. Was there a way that we could have a material app, but also make the material things look distinct so that you could see exactly what we were trying to teach you with them? And the truth is we wanted to show off all the UI APIs that we could. That's what this is going to be now. It's our chance to, when we build something new, give you really good execution of it that's exciting to look at with code that you can steal. So I told them that we should just think about working outside a design system. So if Material is a design system and Apple's iOS design language is a design system, I said, come up with something completely custom, like what Darius was showing. He has made a design system for his product. And I wanted it to be visually arresting. So this is where we got to. The one that we replaced is on the left, and the one on the right is the new one. This is the mobile layout, and this is the desktop layout. It's kind of tough to see there. So let me show you the actual. Go away. So here it is. Here's the gallery that's running on the web. Obviously, you can also build this for iOS or download it from the Android App Store. Wait, that's not called the App Store, the Play Store. I come from iOS. So we have here the different categories of all of your important material components. This has been really fleshed out since Flutter Interact. We've like more than doubled the number of them in there. So you could click on, for example, the sliders one and see an example of sliders, and then click on this button and see the code that powers the demo. So if you really wanted to know exactly how this screen was created, we've given you exactly this screen on the left. It's not like with Dartpad where you can go in and start changing it yet, but that would be cool if somebody wants to submit it. You can change around a couple things here, looking at the range sliders instead, or custom sliders. Oh, that's probably a really interesting one to look at with the demo code. And this is how we accomplish what's going on the right. So there are all sorts of ones like that. And of course, the same thing for the Cupertino ones. And then we have what we call our material studies. These are example products, real example apps. Shrine is one that we've shown before. This one's Rally. And so this is like if you were going to make a fintech app. And what's cool about it is that it and everything else in here is fully responsive. There you go. I think I've got it like a little bit off the screen. I'm sorry. There you go. Yeah. And up here, this is the fun thing to play with. One of the easiest ways to begin adding better support for accessibility in your app is by adding in better support for text scaling. Text scaling is when you turn up the size of the default font on your phone. It is the #1 used accessibility API. People use this constantly, and people of many different ages and abilities. It's not just something that you think of only for people with severe vision problems, but a lot of people, a surprising number of people use it. A lot of people in my family use it. I'm probably on the verge of using it. So you can come in here and set everything to huge and see that things do not break. You can still read things, and then go in and look at our code to see how we accomplish that. When you turn things up to huge, by the way, this is really easy to do just by setting the text scale as a widget. You can check it in our code. I forget the name of the widget that you can wrap your entire app with and then like turn up the text size. Most of the time you'll get those like yellow bar line sort of things. They're telling you you've overflowed, you've overflowed, you've overflowed. When you can get rid of all of those, then that's all you need to do and your app will work. And luckily, if you're dealing with a designer or you're not sure about design even, you don't have to worry about this being the most beautiful version of it. This is about functionality, so it's okay if it starts to look a little bit different than what you're expecting. But just being able to release it can make a big difference for the people that are using it. It's very frustrating for people when they turn up the size and it makes no difference. Let's set it back to system. Another thing is setting in support for right to left languages like Hebrew and Arabic. This is something that really breaks a lot of apps in surprising ways that people don't expect. So you can test that out really easily as well. And locale. This is my favorite one. Well, I mean, I don't have a favorite locale. I should though. Let's look at what's something that has a very different alphabet. What? Kai? What's that? How do you spell it? Oh, Thai. Sorry. Yeah, I've heard of Thai. There you go. So this is all done with the translators that work at Google on Google Apps. If they've left something in English, it's because that's the expectation of people who actually read Thai. But you can see that the alphabets are a different size often than the ones that we come from, where they got stuff going on above and beneath them. These are things that you need to test. And so even if you were just throwing in gibberish that you just typed out, being able to put it in there and see if your layout breaks is a really good first step. And then you can go to like Google Translate if you need to and go get some strings and then put them in the app. We've updated the experience for adding internationalized strings, and it's much better now than it used to be. Oh, I got hit with the other thing. Oh, and one of the really cool things about this is we have full screen reader support. Now, a screen reader, it's a little difficult for me to show you in a demo like this, but that's for people who have severe vision problems and need to essentially tab through your app where it reads back out what's on the screen. So they do it all mostly orally, although we do have research that shows us that people will use combinations of different things, like using a screen reader and a magnifying glass at the same time. It sometimes takes multiple methods in order for people to use apps. We have implemented the full screen reader experience using the semantics library. It's very, very easy to do. Coming from iOS, I was very intimidated by accessibility, and I never worked at a company that was large enough to demand it, so I kind of avoided it a lot. Adding semantics into your app here is super easy. A lot of things have a semantics label field, like images and icons and stuff like that, and you can just put in a string that explains what it is. So if it's a picture of the beach, you can just write picture of the beach in there. Or you can wrap things in a semantic widget that then explains what's going on inside it. I'll show you some more of that. So our key focus was the existing features we had, like Shrine, Rally, Crane, the material component demos, the Cupertino demos, and then adding in new stuff, which is discovering and using our best practices for adaptive layout. They didn't exist yet. People would ask me about it all the time last year, and I'd say, we don't know. Support for accessibility and internationalization, and internationalized accessibility. We threw that in there too. So if you're using the screen reader experience and you speak another language, it'll read it back to you in the correct language. I like that. And all those code samples that I showed you. All right, so what can you take from this that you can use right now? Adaptive layout. If you go into that project, which is in Flutter/samples on GitHub, it's Flutter/samples/gallery. There is inside its /lib adaptive.dart, which is a file you can steal and use in your app to see if it can help you with some of your adaptive problems. Obviously, we're trying to make it so that it can do these two radically different looks, right? And we chose to focus on only a mobile and desktop because tablet is a lot like desktop, and we were kind of running short on time. But you might want to add tablet in there too if that's important to your users. So we had to define the breakpoints for mobile and desktop and expand them to include their desktop layouts. And so here's how we did some of that at a code level. We created this enum, which is just created by us. It's not in Flutter or anything, that we called display type. And we put in desktop and mobile. Obviously, you could add in tablet, countertop, watch, what all the things that you need to care about are. And then we set a breakpoint, which if you come from web, you're probably very familiar with breakpoints. Coming from iOS, we didn't have really breakpoints. We had like class sizes or whatever. But it's just essentially a way of saying how many points is it on any side. If it's more than 700, then we're in desktop. That was just where we started with the basics, that if it was either wider or taller than 700, we were going to say it was desktop. And so we just ask for the display type of the build context anywhere that we are so that we can get what we need. And we also have this, this helper function where we just ask, is this display desktop? So that we can do some simple logic like this in places where we have some edge insets that need to be different on desktop than they are on mobile. We can just pass that in there with the ternary operator, get back what we need. Or we can return entirely different widget trees if we need to. Sometimes you're not just tweaking little things inside boxes, but you're returning very different layouts, essentially almost different apps. So this is a perfectly good way to do that. And we've performance tested it, and it's true that it does work just fine. There were some concerns about like, we're doing that in the widget tree, and is it going to be some sort of yada yada? It's not. Go for it. So this is, the cool thing about this is that this is all built from the media query. And the media query, if you haven't run into it, is a lot like the media query that you find on the web, but a lot more is thrown in there. And one of the cool things is that whenever the screen size changes, like because you either rotated it or because you were dragging the corner like I was, anything in the widget tree that reads media query dot of context anywhere will get rebuilt. It's this cool thing where we go through and we find out like what are the things that are depending on media query right now, we'll rebuild them. All right, accessibility. So we had support for screen readers. I told you about semantic labels. We also have semantic announcements. You can look up code for that. And then we had this graph. We have a graph in the Money app, and we were like, how are we going to do this? And support for text scaling. Sometimes that means tweaking the container size at different places to make sure that things look good. Oh, and support for focus. Focus is something that now matters now that we're on the web and desktop. That's where you're able to like tab through an app on your computer and get to like, now I'm on this button, so I could hit enter if I wanted to. People use that as a form of accessibility, especially if they have motor impairments. There are a lot of people that tab through an app with one, or they may only have one hand, and they can tab through an app and then like hit go on something, and that's how they experience your apps. And you also want to just make sure that it looks good on web. So here's an example of something interesting that you should know. Sometimes you want to exclude something from semantics. The picture, that like logo in the middle of it, that is not a useful piece of information. It is not actual functionality. So if somebody couldn't see very well and they were trying to go through this for a screen reader, we exclude that from them so that it's not read out to them, so that they can get to what really matters here, which is the text fields for entering their username and password, right? That's the functionality here. But adding in a semantic label, like I said before, is just as simple as putting a string on a lot of things. If the class you're already working with has semantic label, then all you have to do is put in a string, and then suddenly that thing is real. And we've also done some testing that, you know, iOS has this like automatic ML read pictures thing where it can like look at a picture and figure out kind of what's inside it. Turns out that works in Flutter, and I don't know if they had to do anything to get it. So for pictures on iOS, you're already ahead of the game. This is how we do some of the text scaling stuff. Oh yeah, text scale factor. Text scale factor is what you want to look at for dealing with things. We changed the width of something based on whether or not, or how the text scale factor deals with math. It's right there. And then this is how we deal with the graph. It turns out that we made it so you can go through bit by bit in like these 5 increments, and it reads back to you what the values are inside it. We worked with the accessibility researchers at Google to figure that one out. Anyway, internationalization, I'll try to wrap it up. We got dozens of locales. We work with our internal translation team. I know that's not fair. We have that and you don't. But Google Translate is better than nothing. Honestly, it may come out like instead of saying like okay. It could be like, yes, I mean, like it could come out sounding wrong to the ear, but it'll still be much more functional than not having anything in there or just relying on English. Plus, you'd be surprised how many people in the community would be totally willing to use your app in whatever language that they know. You'd probably be surprised about what languages your friends know too. We had lots of people on my team that were then able to go through the translations when they came back and verify them. We made sure that there's proper RTL support. There's a lot of built-in stuff using that. If you use start and end, which is like on iOS leading and trailing, instead of using left and right, then you'll automatically get that swapped when you go right to left. Start and, well. And then, like I said, we incorporated internationalization with accessibility. Here's an example of, I don't know. Oh, these are bad. These have left in them, right? The solution is to make them alignment directional and use the start stuff instead of left. Tooltips on icons. Oh, tooltips are a way to get free accessibility semantics inside Flutter, but most people don't know that. Tooltips are already great for when you're dealing with the web, right, or desktop. You hang your mouse over it, and then it kind of comes up and shows you what it is. And I believe that that's also something that happens on Android. I'm not positive. But one of the things that we've done is if you've put in a tooltip for something, we give you a screen reader experience for that too. So it's like 2 birds, 1 stone right there. If you can't figure out what the screen reader experience is, see if you can figure out what the tooltip would be. All right, so I went through a lot of stuff right there. I went through Flutter Interact, some of the details of that, went through Google Fonts for Flutter, highly suggest you use it, and this new gallery that you can find at github.com/flutter/samples. And the best practices inside it for adaptive and responsive layout, some tips on accessibility and internationalization. So, any questions? I see a question. In the back. Madam in orange.
Thank you. That was a brilliant talk. Thank you so much. So earlier on, you spoke about using tools such as Adobe XD and Supernova to generate widgets, and how you want to bridge the gap between design and development. So I'm wondering, how long do you think it will be before those widgets will become usable? Because at the moment, generated widgets do tend to produce a lot of excess unnecessary code. So I'm just wondering, as an estimate, maybe, or what your thoughts on that were.
Really good question. I know exactly what you're talking about, where what you've put in, what the designer put in was a radio button, but what comes out in your generated code is 2 circles, you know? And you're like, come on. I don't know. One of the ways in which we improve stuff like that is we have a sketch plugin that we released a few years ago in Material that is now deprecated, but was our experiment into this, where the designers actually use components instead of shapes. We have a feeling that that's the solution to this, and that we hope that more and more companies like Figma and Adobe and Supernova and stuff embrace using components that kind of come with functionality and details about them and metadata in the designs themselves, that the designers can still totally mess with and whatever, but then turn into what they would be to us. Because that is one of the difficult things. What a designer considers a component, what we consider a component, can be radically different. But in the end, it has to be implemented in code. So I think we're still on the frontier for this sort of thing. But what we're hoping is that, at least for some of the details around design, getting the example code can be useful to you. At the very least, for getting it up and running and then stealing parameters.
I would just maybe add, we had a talk about Supernova, and what they do, they have like an intermediate layer where you get to Supernova, and then you can mark, yes, these 2 circles are radio button.
Oh, cool.
So then the generated code might be actually better. I don't know, like I never tried, but it seemed like the...
See, the breakthrough was tonight, right in front of your eyes. That sounds fantastic. I'd love to try that.
Anybody else? Ooh, good, look at that.
Thank you very much for your talk. So I spend a lot of time on the Dart Reddit group, and one of the questions that has popped up is the Flutter versus Angular Dart. So I just want to know how closely the Flutter team works with the Angular Dart team, and is it ever possible that some of these concepts will be incorporated into Angular Dart, or will Angular Dart get deprecated at some point?
Well, I certainly can't say what their roadmap is for Angular Dart. It's not something that I'm involved in, so I'm not sure. But there are a surprising amount of partnerships between the teams. Both of the things that Google makes that depend on Dart, Angular Dart and Flutter, have internal conferences together. So we end up working a lot in strange ways, like making sure that they get the material design guidelines at the right time, or making sure that when they need something in Dart that we go, hey, is that good for us? So like there's that new thing of non-null by default. If I'm not mistaken, that might have come from the partnership that they have over there. I'm not sure. But just an example of that sort of thing where Dart unites us, and it is true that we do communicate between the two teams very, very well. As far as concepts from one coming to the other, I couldn't say. I just don't know.
Right now, if you want to build an application that uses Cupertino widgets on iOS and Material widgets on Android, then you have two separate widget trees, or you use a third-party library. Are there any plans that you're aware of to kind of unify that at the Flutter level so that you get something more like React Native? You just have one widget and it looks native automatically?
Really good question. Probably the most common question that I get, actually. And since coming from iOS, one I care about a lot. It is not that simple in several ways. One of which is the iOS visual design language is probably a fifth of the size of material design. It is missing an awful lot of guidance because that's not the goal of what they were doing. They were trying to solve individual problems and ended up having enough that they could publish it, kind of like a book in the end. Whereas material is supposed to be put in input, use material, output a UI in a lot of ways. So a lot of the things are just, there isn't enough of an opinion from Apple for us to use them. For the ones where there is a one-to-one thing, there can even be problems that come up. I recently updated the guidelines on material.io for iOS. If you've never seen it before, it's really, oh, I can see my mouse there. I don't have to look behind me. I highly suggest anyone interested in cross-platform design come over here to design, platform guidance, cross-platform adaptation. This was something that existed and we've doubled the size of it as we've learned some more things. Like the way app bars should look on Android and the way they can look on iOS. Our research shows that people do use both of them actually quite interchangeably, but if it matters to you, these are things that are perfectly good to do. And having translucency on iOS, the correct icons to use so that people expect things. We call these really good adaptive candidates. And we now have the dot adaptive constructor in a few widgets. We have it in the switch, and we have it in the slider. And we're going to be bringing it to 3 more. We're going to be bringing it to the dialog. We're going to be bringing it to the icons, and one that I forget. But one of the things that's a little frustrating is something like this, where on Android you're used to having these drop-down menus, but on iOS that's not a thing. People expect either an action sheet or a bottom sheet to come up from the bottom, or maybe a picker. So you'd think, well, why can't we make a dot adaptive drop-down or something like that? Well, it turns out it's because these things were created independently, and the APIs for the drop-down menu and its widgets are completely different from the APIs for the action sheets and the bottom sheets. So there's not an easy one-to-one over there, whereas with the sliders and the switches, they were so simple, it was really easy for us to map them over. So that's another complexity that we have going on there. And then the last is that people have been having a very difficult time defining to us what their expectations are. We're doing a lot of research right now to try to figure out exactly what people mean when they say an iOS look, because it's not just as simple as, like I said, swap out the material one for the Cupertino one, except in a few cases. And in those cases, like, we totally get it. We're going to try to make it easier over time. But people have this expectation that they should be radically different UIs. And we feel that mostly that just comes from an emotion that if you're not familiar with the other, that it must be very different, but it may not be. And it turns out that consistency between the two is not necessarily a negative for performance. If it were, some things that would perform badly would be all the Google apps. There's a reason why when you look at Google Apps on iOS, they do have some variance from the ones on Android, but it is not a radically different design usually. We optimize the hell out of everything, and if we discovered that there was a severe problem because of design language in those two things, we would already know the answers by now. So people's expectations around there are difficult to define. One of the things that we're going to try to work on is giving you enough information that you feel like you've gotten what you need in this. That we know that this is something that's important to people. It's difficult to figure out what it is, and we care about it, and we're just going to keep making it better. When you have specific requests, like maybe you already ported something from iOS to Android or the other way around, it'd be really, really great if you could email them to me. I ask for this all the time, and nobody's ever done it. So be the change you want to see in the world. Send me the iOS or Android adaptations that you're not seeing or that you've had to do in your thing so that we can have another data point on what we need to do. Is that helpful? Also, there are a lot of packages online where people have made things that help you, but a lot of them include an opinion that's far more opinionated than we want to be. Yes, there is.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I have a question about internationalization. You mentioned it in your slides, but is it are those improvements going to Dart Intel package, or is it a separate package completely built for the Flutter?
What, the improvements that I was talking about? The improvements are around process, actually. They're around developer experience using the package.
Okay.
Yeah, so like the files that you use with your strings and stuff like that, that's where the improvements have been. If you had a specific internationalization support request, I'm sure it's already filed on GitHub, and you could let me know of the GitHub bug number in an email, and I'll make sure that Hans, who's in charge of that, knows that that's urgent. By the way, the best way to get whatever you care about dealt with by us is to hit the thumbs button or the heart button on a GitHub issue. We actually rank the issues that come in that way, either by like, it's a crash and a regression, those are most important. After that, like feature requests and stuff like that, number of thumbs.
I saw some more hands over here, Pascal.
That was a great talk, and I'm just...
Oh, are you Pascal? Did you say Pascal?
Yep.
Oh, hey, Pascal.
Hi.
Nice to meet you, finally.
Your talk at last Google I/O was really amazing, and I'm just stunned how much has improved when it comes down to accessibility, focus selections, and adaptive UI. I want to ask, how are you guys dealing with different DPI scales for the same resolution set? Because from the examples, you were only using points.
Boy, I haven't run into problems where I've had to deal with that. And I'm not the team that actually built how we're handling that, so I'm probably not the right person to answer it. But one of the things that we do care about is when things need to be relative. I think I might have mentioned this in my talk last year, this idea that like a 12-point font far away needs to actually be like a 40-point font in order to be read. And coming up with those sort of automatic calculations is a fun, easy thing that we can do. As far as dealing with actual DPIs and screens, I'm not qualified to answer. I'm sorry.
I have a quick question. So Yasmin Evian, she demonstrated an application at Interact on Android where she was actually testing themes.
Yes, I built the theme builder that she used for that.
In Flutter? Because there's an Android version of it.
There is also, yeah. So that talk that she gave, she said, we were looking for content for Flutter Interact, and we wanted to use, she's from the designer relations team, and we said, what do you have that you'd like to do? And she said, I'd love to do this talk that I've done before in Flutter. Can you help me with the code?
Great. So that's available where?
That is available on Flutter/samples. I have an open pull request to merge it in, but all the code is in my branch if you want to go look at it.
Okay.
Yes, theme builder, I think I call it. It's a good reminder that maybe I should finish the...
Hi, thanks for that talk.
Sure.
Could you just tell me, is there any way that that Google could help me understand how somebody with visual impairment uses their phone? Because I know that they have TalkBack, but as a user who doesn't have visual impairment, I don't use TalkBack, and I don't know what the experience is like. I don't know how to go up and down. I remember, like, on the old phones, there used to be a little joypad and whatever on the Nexus 1, but you don't have that anymore. How does that all work? How do we find out about that, and how do we test it?
So there's several, great question. There are several different ways you can go. Some of the platforms, I know at least on iOS, have accessibility helpers that can kind of help visualize this for you. We have something, I forget what it is, like a flag you can put on your app that turns on your semantic, all the semantic nodes on your screen, and you can see them all drawn at once. So if you see like, oh, it's got a circle around something I didn't expect, I'll go get rid of that. And then you didn't have to do the listen to it or swipe through it thing, at least to get cleaned up before that. But then when it comes to doing that experience, I don't know if Google has anything specifically, but there are lots of videos online on how to test with those. It's really easy on iOS. It's pretty easy on Android. And if you're worried about doing it wrong, don't be. If the people that use these tend to work really, really fast. So they'll be like swipe, 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 swipe. They know, like, as soon as like a syllable is heard, what the thing is that it's caught on. They will often give you developer feedback if there's something that can be improved. I remember the very first app that I worked on that had an accessibility request come in where somebody said, this app works almost great, can you just change this? And I was like, I'm so glad you told me. I wouldn't actually know what sort of thing is best. The things that you might want to look out for are like ordinal things, like the order of things, like not going necessarily from left to right, but up and down, if that's what would make most sense. Like if you have volume buttons next to channel buttons, you don't want to read them left to right, you want to read them up and down. But in all the other ways, as long as you're reading the information, too much is better than none. So don't be afraid of it, really.
Any last questions?
A small continuation from the previous question. How much from the bridge between Flutter and the underlying operating system handles those accessibility features?
If I'm not mistaken, Flutter handles just creating whatever data the native APIs for accessibility are expecting. So we try to map them one-to-one best we can. We had an issue with this come up recently where somebody said, you're not giving me a certain kind of screen reader experience on a Switch that I was expecting. And we realized it's because they were coming from Android that had one more parameter for controls that iOS didn't have. But there's not much that we can do when that sort of thing happens. It's really whatever limitations are of the underlying APIs. But we just try to make sure that we're hooked up best we can to them.
All right. Thank you very much, Will. That's been brilliant.
No, sure. My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.